Hey guys, and welcome to CastCast. This week, being week 6 in the NFL, I am going to make my predictions and I'm going to try to make it quick and snappy and to the point. But thank you all for watching, and let's get to it. First game that we got is Jacksonville and Chicago in London at Tottenham Stadium. So, the Bears obviously coming off a commanding win against the Panthers, and then Jacksonville narrowly getting a victory last week against the Colts. Obviously, the crazy thing about the Jaguars Colts game to me is that 5 minutes remaining, you're up by 2 scores, and then somehow your defense almost lets up the game to where you do have to kick a game winning field goal, a gaming winning field goal to win this thing when you had 5 minutes left and you were up by two, and you're not even up against, electric Anthony Richardson last week. So that concerns me with Jacksonville. They do have a low ranked, defense this year for whatever reason. I don't think that they've been giving up, besides obviously, the last 3 games, they've been giving up crazy points. But it's like against, some teams that have been struggling offensively. Like Indy, you can't tell me has put up a bunch of points, week to week. It's been kind of off and on. Houston, to me, hasn't really found their thing. Buffalo the week before, yeah, you could say that they had found their offense, but now they're struggling, against more competent defense. Cleveland, obviously, a kind of a terrible game there. And then Miami, I mean, they held them really good there, in week 1, and then they just kind of blew it in the end offensively. And obviously the Bears, we know, winning against the Rams, winning against Carolina, and then obviously week 1 they won against Tennessee by 7, and then their 2 losses come into Indianapolis and Houston, you know. But looking at this matchup, obviously we have the Bears, who are in the NFC North, which is by record the toughest division right now in football. No team being at or below 500. So really, it's kind of a sprint in the North. This is a game the Bears need to win. I don't know how else I can really say it. They are playing really well defensively. Trevor Lawrence has been playing well, but having like very, big mistakes that I think affect the outcomes of these games. Where it's like, ultimately it doesn't really come down to, to him, but it's like you have costly, mishaps in games, taking points off the board and just some bad throwing at times. I think about the Damar Hamlin throw where it's like, oh, he overshoots his guy by so much that, oh, Hamlin, who's like 7 yards behind the wide receiver, gets an interception. The Bears obviously are very opportunistic. They are an opportunistic defense. That is what they won them the game week 1 against Tennessee with a pick 6. And, ultimately their special teams as well, have been really good, this year. Usually the Jaguars, I wouldn't bet against in London, but I'm going to this time because I think the Bears, it is definitely their game to lose. Now, Jacksonville does have their back pressed up against the wall. They only give Chicago a 1 point advantage in this game. What does that tell me? That, the odds and that sort of thing, they see that Chicago scored a bunch last week. Caleb had his first game over 200 yards passing. Yes, I mean, it was over 300. I get that. But all these games prior, he didn't even have 200 yards passing. So, to me, it's kind of prove you can do it consistently. Obviously, you've been getting better each week. If you're somehow able to eclipse what you did last week against Jacksonville, then I might give it to you because Jacksonville actually has like an offense that isn't going to rely on just one big run like Chuba Hubbard had against the Bears last week, and then they ultimately they just fell short. Now I'm kind of, going over this game, and I'm thinking to myself, like, what is going to help, Jacksonville win? They need to be able to run the ball. Tank Bigsby had a decent game last week. Travis Etienne, I think we've all expected him to do well. And it's like Christian Kirk and Brian Thomas really both have to click at the same time. The defense, I'm not sure what is wrong with it. They are a bit banged up, but so is every other team. And I just, I think that this pass rush, if they can get to Caleb, that is their best shot to win. They do have the guys like Armstead, Walker, Hines Allen. They just got to be able to get home against a shoddy O-line. And, they can make it hard on the Bears. But the Bears, like I said, better defense and good defense. So I'm going to go with them. I think that they're not going to score as much as last week. And I think that they're going to score 23. And I think Jacksonville scores 13 to give the Bears a 10-point advantage and win over the Jaguars. Moving on, we have a huge 1 o'clock game with Commanders-Ravens. Now, the Commanders are obviously red hot, first in their division, and then you've got the Ravens, and the Ravens, obviously, coming off a crazy win last week against Cincinnati, one that they probably should have lost, but I mean, Marlon Humphrey came through in the clutch when they needed him to. And then, of course, Tucker's going to make his kicks. And they are on a 3-game win streak after starting 0-2. So they are also hot. And you look at the Commanders, their only loss coming to Tampa Bay week 1. But then it's like they've gone on a roll. They've beaten teams, last week obviously against Cleveland who isn't very respected right now. But Arizona, has had an up and down season, and they tempered that. Beating Cincinnati, I think, is a statement win, besides Cincinnati being only a 1-win team to this point, who has competed in just about every game they've been in, at least points-wise. And then even the Giants have looked scrappier than I think anybody could have expected. Now, it's at Baltimore. So what I'm going to say is that Baltimore, Derrick Henry, Bateman, Zay Flowers, they are just going to be too much for Washington. And they're too hot. And they know that with the way their division is going and kind of lingering around, that they can start to potentially pull ahead, since the Steelers have fumbled the last couple of games. So they're going to take advantage of that. It's at home, electric stadium. I'm going with the Ravens. And my score prediction is going to be 24-20 in favor of the Ravens. Moving on, you got the Arizona Cardinals coming to play the Green Bay mother-loving Packers. The Packers, crazy enough this year, only 3-2, tied with the Bears, only behind the Lions because they had a bye, and they also have three wins and 1 losses, and then obviously the undefeated Vikings, in their division, who have a bye this week. Obviously Arizona, being a good team this year, being a lot scrappier than, you can imagine, and that sort of thing. And, beating San Fran when I was like, oh, there's no way in hell they win this. Like, it's been 23-10, for a while. And then they miraculously score 2 touchdowns. I thought it was going to be borderline a repeat of that, on Thursday night, with San Fran, where, the Seahawks got a little bit electric. And they were starting to come back on them. And barring, some pivotal mistakes by the Seahawks, that was going to be a lot closer of a game, which is what I predicted. And, the Cardinals, obviously Kyler Murray playing well. He was the hottest at the beginning of the year with, having a perfect passer rating game, hitting Marvin Harrison for a lot of touchdowns, and he's continued to get a lot of touchdowns. Looking at this game, The Packers have been kind of banged up. Obviously, they're not, the Cardinals aren't running the ball quite as well as I would want with designed runs to James Conner. But it's like the Packers, surprisingly kind of really off and on the offense. Crazy to me that they are the 5th ranked offense, according to NFL.com right now. The defense has not played up to what I think their potential is, but I do think that they've had a lot of injuries, and for whatever reason, unless, my Packers are blitzing, they're not forcing a lot of pressure rushing for, which is what I think Hafley wants to be able to do. Because, he's a guy who coached on the Niners, and the Niners were notorious for making it really hard on teams, on quarterbacks, because they only needed to rush for. The Packers have done a pretty sound job against mobile QBs this year, like Hurts, Anthony Richardson, and now, Kyler Murray. But Kyler Murray is a squirrel back there. I don't expect them to really get a lot of, sacks on him unless they're getting immediate pressure. Now, I do expect my Packers to take the win here. A lot of guys are looking like they are potentially coming back, with the likes of like Jair, Romeo Doubs back from his suspension. Christian Watson is questionable, but I think they will hold him if there's any sort of thing. Luke Musgrave was put on IR because of an ankle injury he had, but I think Tucker Kraft, as the league has started to see, is really, coming into his own as one of those guys who's just going after the ball and really playing dominant run after the catch football. Now, Devontae Wyatt is out. He was really good. I think he's, going to be on IR. But if Jair Alexander comes back and we have the secondary back up to, fully healthy, essentially, with his return with the star back, I think it's going to be that much tougher on Marvin Harrison. And I do think Harrison has had growing pains. He's a good wide receiver. He's a big, tall threat, easy to see downfield. But I overall think that the Packers are going to just be able to out-finesse the Cardinals, at home in Lambeau, and improve to 4-2. And a game that you look at, it could be really bad if the Packers lose this, obviously. I don't think that they're really thinking about that. But I think that, Josh Jacobs, Jaden Reed have big games against a defense that has a lack of talent. And I think that they're going to be able to do, we did a pretty decent job against, Jefferson, a couple weeks back, where he didn't put up a ton of yards. And I think that Marvin Harrison, I think we can do a good job against him, as he is about the only weapon that is like a serious, consistent threat on Arizona. So I am going to say my Packers win. I think that the offense, can pop off this game, and I'm going to go with them scoring 31, and Arizona, I'm going to say, scores 20 in this game. Moving on, we got the Houston Texans and the New England Patriots. Houston, obviously without Nico Collins, maybe it's a good time for them to lose him in hindsight, because if they can play tough against New England and a defense that is usually pretty well coached, I think that they can, maybe they can start to grow something else. Mixon still hurt, questionable, and that sort of thing. It kind of worries me. You kind of want him and Stephon Diggs. I do think CJ Stroud needs to build more of a rapport with Stephon Diggs. I think he's gotten, I wouldn't say like limited action, but he hasn't been a focal piece. It's been all Nico Collins this year. There's a reason why he, leads the league in yards, this year with, just 33 yards short of 600 through 5 games. So a really dominant year for him, and he's a really dominant wide receiver. Now, do I think Houston, absolutely needs him? No, I think that they can have a very balanced offense without him, and that he's that X factor difference maker. But I think that Mixon, Diggs, good veterans, and even, how CJ Stroud has been feeding it to his tight ends, I think that they're a very balanced offense, even without Collins, that it's going to be hard to defend everybody. So looking at this game, I definitely expect the Texans to improve to 5-1, really start to run away from their division rivals in this game, and I think that they win. I'm gonna say 26-10 against New England, and I think that they're really gonna give Drake May headaches because Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson are going to be after Drake May in his first NFL start. I don't want to say too much more about Drake May. I don't watch college. I think that he's getting put into a situation where it's like, if he can overcome that adversity, that pressure against a team that's going to bring pressure and, has a smart and good defense, I think it's going to be tough for Drake May. I think he's going to have to be catered to and protected in order for him to not get banged up in this game. Looking at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the New Orleans Saints, obviously in New Orleans at the Superdome, this NFC South rivalry, the thing that I'll say about the Saints is they obviously have there's another rookie QB making his debut, and it's Spencer Rattler due to Derek Carr's rib injury. Now, the Buccaneers, obviously coming off a loss. They just lost to Atlanta in a game that they should have won. Their last game, obviously, coming on Thursday night last week, so they've got ample time to prepare for the Saints. Obviously, with this game, you look at Tampa Bay, their arsenal of weapons and that sort of thing. Rachaad White is a little banged up, which is unfortunate. Trey Palmer, who I liked, is out for this game, unfortunately. And then you have, Rashid Shaheed, Alvin Kamara are both questionable, and same with Taysom Hill, which I just think that, if these three are banged up, these are their three playmakers. Yes, Taysom Hill's a playmaker for them. I wonder who Spencer Rattler is going to throw to besides Chris Olave, Chris Olave is a great wide receiver. I like him. He does a lot of good things, but are you going to be able to capture that special, offense that these guys had the first couple weeks of the season, or were they really figured out by the rest of the league, which obviously, looking at the Buccaneers, they just got ripped apart by Kirk Cousins and bad defensive play. I don't think Kirk Cousins played some crazy game. I think it was far worse defense, allowing them to get way too many chunk plays over the middle. And with New Orleans, I mean, they definitely have less weapons than the Buccaneers have at this point. But it's like, I just don't see Tampa Bay losing this game and allowing the Saints to kind of eke back in to the race and be ahead of them, in the division, even though it's at home and it is hard to play in the Superdome. I think that the Buccaneers, I think that Baker's going to silence the critics. I think he's playing phenomenal football. So I'm taking him over the unknown of Spencer Rattler, who obviously was a 5th-round pick with good upside, scrambling ability, or so I've heard, because I don't watch college. And I mean, if his rise to fame is as quick as an actual rattlesnake, then hey, maybe they'll win. Maybe there'll be some fireworks in New Orleans this weekend. But I'm going with Tampa Bay. I think that they were really humbled, and I think that defense is going to come out sharp. So I'm taking Tampa Bay over New Orleans. I think they score 28, to be honest with you. And I think that New Orleans, I'm going to say they score 13 in this game. looking at the next game, we have the Cleveland Browns and the Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles coming off a bye. The Browns, as we know, crazy bad drama in their organization where, oh, you should bench Deshaun Watson. Should never come down to that. We're paying this guy this much money. I mean, it seems to me like they are unwilling to do what the Broncos did last year with Russell Wilson. Sure, the Broncos handed Wilson this, crazy contract and he technically wasn't playing on it. But it's like, if that were the case, then they never would have been like, yeah, we're cutting you and taking this fat cap hit. Deshaun Watson, as far as I'm concerned, maybe he's doing what, they say he's doing with all these allegations, or maybe people just say that he's an easy target, or who knows, right? But, you come in looking into this game, and the Browns, they're just going to get whooped this game. It's a 9.5-point favorite for Philadelphia at home, off of a bye. They're getting healthy. This is definitely a time for them to prove that they are going to be a team to be meddled with. Obviously Philadelphia, you look at this game and, they really need to come out and they need to show that they are going to come in, play, and just dominate a team that is struggling. To me, if they don't dominate in this game, I'm going back to saying that like Philadelphia is a mid-tier team after this. They are a mid-tier team with a ton of talent, and if they don't win, by at least, 2 possessions in this game, I'm going to worry if I'm a Philadelphia fan. You should not be coming off a bye when the Browns are arguably one of the worst teams in the league, and have a close game when you're returning to form and getting healthy with Brown, Smith. Obviously Saquon hasn't been hurt, but you're fully healthy. You got Lane Johnson too. So it's like, if you aren't dominating this team, despite their defense, having a lot of talent, but the wind is not completely knocked out of the Browns, and they're getting dragged down, literally, a maelstrom in the ocean is the way that this, it's the slow death of the Browns this season. I mean, you could say that, oh, the ship has already crashed. They're at the bottom of the Mariana Trench or something. But hey, it's not like they're playing completely inept football. Yeah, they were against Washington, but they barely lost Las Vegas. They barely lost against the Giants. Jacksonville, they beat because Jacksonville struggles. And then Dallas, the only other team that, maybe you could say that like, oh yeah, they're a good team and they got pummeled by them. But it's like, if you're Philadelphia, are you really looking confidently after this is a team that, was beat by 2 possessions by your division rival Cowboys? And you don't need to dominate. You need to dominate this game at home. So I'm going to predict Philadelphia. And here is my prediction, because I still don't trust, Sirianni or their O coordinator. I'm not going to lie. I don't trust them. I think they score 23. And if they're going to prove to me that they are a solid team, Cleveland is going to score 6 points. They're not going to let up a touchdown against this struggling team with the talent that they have. So that's my prediction for Browns visiting the Eagles. Looking at the next game, we have a division rival in the AFC, Colts, Titans. Titans coming off a bye. Colts coming off a game that they almost came back in against Jacksonville, losing to the only team that hadn't won one last week. Which, they played a hell of a game, offensively. But defensively, you can't tell me that's up to your standards, Colts. And now this week, you're going up against a Titans team that is, refreshed, rejuvenated after a bye. And they're obviously a division rival, and it's in Tennessee. Do you really want to fall to the Titans, who are the worst in your division right now, and you want to fall to 2-4? against a division rival team that, they're likely not making the playoffs, with the way that they've started. Will Levis to me has looked good, but he's made these key mistakes that have really just gut punched the Titans. Now, whether it's Richardson or whether it's Flacco that are starting, I do not care. I think they both can run the offense. I think Flacco can still spin it fairly well and plays smart. Obviously, with Richardson, it's a little bit more risk because of the way that he's somewhat of a gambler and somewhat of a wild card of a player still kind of raw because he hasn't played, he hasn't even played 10 games yet, in his career. So looking at this, I think the Colts win the game, regardless of whether it's Richardson or Flacco. Yeah, they don't have Jonathan Taylor, but that clearly didn't stop them from scoring last week. And the Titans, they're going to lose this game. I'm going to go low scoring for this game. And I'm going to say that the Colts win 20-17 over Tennessee. Now moving on, we have another divisional game with Chargers Broncos. Chargers also coming off a bye. They go to visit the Broncos at Mile High for a 4:00 game. And obviously with them, you had Dobbins who was cooking. And then, he does nothing. He essentially does nothing. Last week, the last game or the game that they played against Kansas City, only 32 yards. But as we know, Kansas City just handled the Chargers, not in as great of fashion as we're used to seeing. But, the Chargers, they put up 10 early, and then they just could not do anything the rest of the game. They couldn't do anything. So looking at this game against Denver, who seems to have had a resurgence, who has a defense that's playing really, really well, I think that this is a game that the Chargers will really be tested. Coming off of a bye, the Broncos coming off of a win and having the 4th-ranked defense going up against, what they say is the second-ranked defense. And I will say this, I give them props to holding Mahomes to 17. But overall, you look at the banged up Chiefs, and is that as much of an accomplishment this year? Maybe. But I think that Bo Nix isn't likely to turn the ball over. He's looking like a team a player that is going to try and be coming in and, really playing smart football with limited talent, but a good system that Sean Payton has put in front of him. And it really shows to me why they drafted him, which is what I believed when they drafted him. Like, a guy who's smart with the football, accurate, is definitely a type of guy that Sean Payton wants. And that's one reason why I think that he didn't gel well with Russ, is because Russ wants too much hero ball, whereas Bo Nix is calculating and precise. Herbert's still kind of hurt in this game. He's obviously going to play. If it was Taylor Heineke, I would just say, yep, the Broncos are winning this. But I think that, hopefully the Chargers and their offense can really run the ball well again, because that was their strength, and they essentially looked like a team lost out there. Rashawn Slater still a little banged up, questionable. And, Joe Alt, I do remember, getting punished a little bit these last couple of games when people were like, oh, he's such a good tackle. And don't get me wrong, I think he is still a very good tackle, but he's been getting a little bit punished these last couple of games against better pass rushers, more savvy pass rushers. And, maybe not allowing a lot of sacks, but pressures. And with Herbert, with his limited mobility, with his injury, he's going to need all the protection against a defense that's playing very sound this year. But I'm going to go with the Broncos for this game. Just because I think that they offensively are playing really well. The Chargers are playing kind of a keep away type of offense where it's like, I don't mind it, but you don't have a crazy, J.K. Dobbins is a fine back, don't get me wrong, but you don't have a crazy proven back that you're going to be able to just workhouse with all the time, So, and their run game was definitely rattled, against the Chiefs. And seeing that this is a defensive game and the Broncos have a perennial defense, I think that they hold the Chargers to a low number of points, but I don't think that they score a ton either. I'm going to predict this game 17-13 in favor of the Broncos. Moving on to Steelers Raiders, an AFC showdown in Las Vegas. That's a 4:00 game. Now, the Steelers obviously having a good chance to win last week, but they lost against Dallas. Dallas was handing them interceptions, like Dak threw a couple of stupid interceptions, fumbled the ball, and obviously they also lost against Indianapolis, the week before. When their offense finally came alive, but the defense didn't play so well. I think against the Raiders, who the heck knows what's going on, with their team. I think you look at that they don't have Devontae Adams still, or he's questionable. They obviously haven't traded him, but I just wonder if he's going to play, and I wonder if Aiden O'Connell can play well enough for them to win. A lot of injuries on their offense. Zamir White questionable, Jacoby Myers questionable. Just a lot of players, questionable. Brock Bowers, Michael Mayer is questionable, but Brock Bowers has been playing well. Crosby's still questionable. We know he's playing. The only reason why I think I would give the Raiders a shot in this game is if they can get a lot of pressure on Fields, but Fields is really squirrely. And you don't want to lose this game if you're the Steelers. Even though you're visiting the Raiders, the Steelers are 2-1 on away games. If they can improve to 3-1, that's looking really good on their season. That their away games are very, very strong. And they just need to get that home, the last of their home game stretch here and the later half of the large chunk of the later half of the season, and they can really get going. And I do believe Fields has been playing well, only 1 interception this year, 5 TDs. I do believe that they're gonna figure it out. I think they need to get Pickens a little bit more involved. He's so dynamic. They just need to get the ball in his hands because he is a dynamic playmaker. Now, Pittsburgh, I'm sure, is a little bit mad about throwing away their last game to Dallas. I think that they're going to get after Aiden O'Connell. He's not behind as good of an O-line as Dak is. And I think that's going to be the difference. And Pittsburgh's going to run the ball a bit better. These are two teams with, I think, similar philosophies where it's like Raider football, you want to pound and run, a lot, and then rely on your stout defense to, get sacks, potential turnovers. But the Steelers just do it better, and they have more talent and better coaching, in my opinion. So looking at this game, I'm going to take Pittsburgh, and I'm going to say they score 20, and I think they hold the Raiders to 13. Moving on, we have Falcons, Carolina. Obviously, as we know, Kirk Cousins threw for over 500 yards in his last game. As far as I'm concerned, Kirk Cousins still looks like a guy where it's like it's glorified, and bloated stats against a defense that just didn't show up that game. And then for whatever reason, they just don't run it. They just don't, they don't use Bijan Robinson that much, in the run game, which is wild to me. This last game, maybe they wanted their passing game to really take off, but it's like, who cares? Now they go up against the Panthers, who just gave Caleb Williams the best start of his, young career. And the Falcons are going to destroy the Panthers. If it's even a close game, then I'm going to tell everybody that, like, yeah, the Falcons are not for real. They've had a couple of close games, obviously, this year against better teams like the Chiefs, but it's like, I just don't see it with the Falcons. Like, the Buccaneers, as far as I'm concerned, the defense was sleeping that game. And it's crazy to me. They only give Atlanta a 6-point advantage in this game. And it's like, it's against Carolina, arguably the worst team in the league. So looking at this game, I'm going to have to say that I am taking Atlanta, of course, because I think you'd be crazy not to. And I'm going to say they score 23. And I think that Carolina, they score 13. And that is my prediction. Because if they don't handle Carolina, that starts to make you wonder, like, is this a good offense if it's this sporadic? But moving on, we've got Detroit, Dallas. Down in Dallas. The Cowboys, obviously 3-2. They haven't won a game at home. Detroit remembers. There's no way they're not going to remember that game from last year where the refs essentially screwed the Lions. They screwed them. It affected seeding, which I'm not going to lie, I didn't mind because I got to see my Packers destroy the Cowboys in the playoffs. And then, the Cowboys say they're going all in, all of this mumbo jumbo over the offseason. And they're like, we can't afford Derrick Henry. But we're going to pay, Prescott the most ever. And then, of course, CeeDee Lamb. CeeDee Lamb to me deserves to get paid. But it's like, we can't afford Henry. Maybe if you weren't so pass dependent on Prescott, who, don't get me wrong, he can throw a nice ball, but he chokes. And it's like, even last week, he almost choked against a good, a good defense in Pittsburgh. If that happens against Detroit, Detroit's going to punish him. Pittsburgh obviously has, offensive problems, but Detroit, oh man, no, they don't. This is going to be a true test for Dallas to me. If they can, honestly, to me, if they lose this game, but they only lose by a few points, I would take it as a good sign for Dallas. It's going to be humbling because they're second in their division. But you look at, their team and who's injured on it. How are they going to stop the run? How are they going to stop the run? No DeMarcus Lawrence, no Marshawn Kneeland, who's came in and looking good. Micah Parsons isn't playing. It is crazy to me how many of these main guys are getting hurt on Dallas. And it's like, yeah, you played, good enough defensively against the Pittsburgh, but like I said, they have, obviously Pittsburgh has struggles offensively. You're coming up against Detroit, who it's like, the last game they were in was, against, the Seahawks, and, they were able to just score, as we know in that game. So, and Seattle supposedly had a good defense, even though, like, the same thing happened last night. So who even knows if that's true? But you look at Dallas, and this is a true test for them. If they can keep this game close, especially it being somewhat of a revenge game for Detroit, I think it's going to be a crazy fun game to watch, to be honest with you. So I am going Detroit. Despite me wanting them, honestly, this is probably one of the only cases I would ever root for Dallas is when it's such a tight race in the North, but I'm going to go and I'm going to say Dallas is going to lose. And I think Detroit, I think they're going to score 31-28 against the Dallas Cowboys. And that's optimistically. I think Dallas it could be far worse than that. But moving on to Sunday Night Football, we got the Bengals visiting New York. Obviously, I'm sure people thought that this would be a doozy of a game, looking at it for a Sunday night game going into the season. But it is crazy that this is a must win, obviously, for both teams. Obviously, the Giants in a division with the Commanders, who are winning games. And, but they are playing a lot scrappier than I think a lot of people give them credit for. I think the defense is young, but they're playing well. Dable has them well coached. And it's like they have, they obviously have just very, very young players. And I think that, Neighbors, I don't think is playing, again this week. But Daniel Jones ultimately trying to save his career. I think that, if you do bad as Daniel Jones this year, I think you're getting cut. That is just my honest opinion. And, they still may potentially trade him if they could get something for him, I feel like. But it's like he's playing well. Last week, I don't think anybody thought that, the Giants could hold their own, beat the Seahawks. And do it in a way where it's like, oh yeah, it's without Malik Neighbors, and they haven't had 2 scoring halves of football. The one knock I'll say to this game is that Kayvon Thibodeau is out, but I do think that Dexter Lawrence, Bobby Okereke, Brian Burns, I think that they can still get pressure on Burrow. And, I've really grown to like this secondary, this scrappy secondary of the Giants. They compete, they hustle, they play with, good energy. Sometimes they do get called for penalties, but the Giants are playing a lot better than I think anybody thought they would this year. I think people were saying going into the year that the Giants, were bottom of the pack and maybe the 3rd worst team in the league, only before New England and the Panthers. But it's they're playing scrappy, competitive football. Dable has these guys playing. And then, of course, you have the Bengals, who it's they've been scoring a lot on offense. But it's like I said, I think the Giants, there's a potential that they get blown out this game because, Cincinnati really does need to turn it up, But looking at this, I don't think Cincinnati has an easy win. I think with the way their defense is playing, they really need to. They haven't had a good game since they played against, Kansas City. And I get it, the defense blew the game with that PI against Kansas City. But I think that Cincinnati is just going to keep on getting into shootouts. And I'm going to go with Cincinnati because I think, October football, it's a second game. Cincinnati honestly should have won one against, in a crazy game against the Ravens, who I think the Ravens are one of the only few teams that could have came back against a team like Cincinnati last week. And I think, the Giants, they just don't have the experience yet or the talent to keep up with that amount of points. So I'm going with Cincinnati, and I'm going to say that they score 30 in this game to 17 for Sunday Night Football. Now, if you guys have any questions or comments or anything you would like to point out about the games, I'd love to hear them and chat with you about them and that sort of thing. But that's going to wrap up this prediction video for CastCast. And as always, go Pack Go.